I had always been the perfect wife, loyal, trusting, devoted. I believed in love, in commitment, in the quiet, unshakable bond of marriage. For years, I built my world around Matt, never questioning his late meetings, his sudden business trips, or the way he sometimes came home smelling like a perfume I didn't own. I wanted to believe in us, in him. But life has a way of yanking the blindfold off when you least expect it. And on an otherwise ordinary afternoon, while folding laundry, I found it, a text message, sitting there, bold and undeniable, flashing like a warning sign I could no longer ignore. I didn't cry. I didn't even gasp. Instead, I just stared at the screen, reading the words over and over again. Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again. Same place? Same time? Casual, effortless, as if my entire life wasn't standing on the edge of a knife. My stomach twisted, my fingers tightening around the fabric in my hands. But I didn't break. No. Something colder, sharper, took over. I could cry later. Right now, I had something better to do. I started connecting the dots. A charge on his credit card, some high-end restaurant I'd never been to, a timestamp, a crumpled receipt shoved into his nightstand drawer. He hadn't even bothered to cover his tracks. He thought I'd never look. That was his first mistake. His second, underestimating me. When Matt walked through the door that evening, I was already 5 steps ahead. I kissed his cheek, smiled, asked about his day like nothing had changed, but in my mind, the plan was already in motion. I knew exactly where he'd be tomorrow night, and for the first time in years, I had no intention of waiting at home. The next day, I moved with precision. No hesitation, no second guessing, just quiet, deliberate action. I made the reservation myself, selecting the perfect table, one that offered the best view of the unfolding disaster. Not across the room. No, that would be too easy. Too distant. I wanted to be close enough to hear the laughter die in his throat. Close enough to see the flicker of panic in his eyes when he realized he wasn't as clever as he thought. I took my time getting ready. I wasn't just dressing up. I was crafting an image, shaping a moment that would be burned into his memory forever. A dress he used to love, a shade of red that once made his eyes linger, perfume, the one I knew he associated with the early days, back when he still looked at me like I was the most captivating thing in the room. I wanted to be undeniable, not desperate, not broken, just unforgettable. When I stepped in front of the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, but because of the fire in my eyes, the kind I hadn't seen in years. I wasn't sad. I wasn't defeated. I was in control. And that, more than anything, made me smile. With one last glance at my reflection, I grabbed my purse, straightened my shoulders, and walked out the door. Tonight, the tables were turning. The drive to the restaurant was eerily calm. No pounding heart, no sweaty palms, just the steady hum of the engine and the rhythm of my own breathing. I wasn't nervous. If anything, I felt lighter than I had in months, maybe years. There's a strange kind of peace that comes with knowing exactly what you're about to do, and that nothing can stop you. I pulled up to the valet, stepped out, and felt the evening air brush against my skin. The restaurant glowed in the distance, its warm lighting spilling onto the pavement, inviting, elegant. A place meant for whispered conversations and stolen glances. A place where secrets could thrive. But not tonight. Tonight, secrets were being served on a silver platter. As I stepped inside, the maître d' greeted me with a polished smile. "Reservation under?" "Gina Jensen," I said, my voice smooth, unwavering. "Ah, yes, right this way." I followed him through the dimly lit space, the clinking of glasses and soft murmur of conversation filling the air. Then, as if guided by fate, my eyes landed on him, Matt. Sitting there, laughing, leaning in just a little too close to her. Emily, young, polished, completely unaware. He looked so at ease, so confident. He truly believed I was at home, oblivious. That changed the moment I reached my seat. As I gracefully slid into my chair, the one directly beside theirs, Matt's laughter cut off mid-sentence. His back stiffened, his fingers tightening around his glass. For a split second, he didn't turn, as if, by some miracle, ignoring me would make me disappear. I leaned back, crossed my legs, and picked up the menu. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, I turned my head toward him, locking eyes. And I smiled. I could feel the tension ripple through the air before Matt even spoke. It was in the way his shoulders went rigid, the way his grip on the wine glass tightened just enough to make his knuckles pale. He still hadn't turned to face me, and for a brief moment, I wondered if he'd try to play it off, pretend I was some stranger, a ghost in the periphery of his perfect little affair. But I wasn't a ghost. I was flesh and bone, sitting not across the room, not in the shadows, but right here, close enough to hear every breath, every stammered word. Close enough for Emily to notice the color draining from his face. I let the moment stretch, sipping my water, pretending to scan the menu as if this was any other night. As if I hadn't just set the stage for his worst nightmare. And then, with calculated ease, I lowered the menu, turned to him, and spoke. Softly, smoothly, like silk sliding over steel. Matt. He finally turned, his face a carefully arranged mask of surprise, but his eyes were pure, unfiltered panic. For a second, Matt just sat there, frozen in place, his mouth slightly open like he was about to say something. Anything. But nothing came out. His mind was working overtime, scrambling for an excuse, a way out, a way to rewrite the scene unfolding before him. But there was no way out. Not tonight. Emily, on the other hand, had no idea what was happening. Yet. She glanced between us, her brows slightly furrowed, her lips parting as if she was about to ask the question neither of us wanted to answer. I could see the exact moment doubt started to creep in, the slight shift in her posture, the way her fingers curled away from Matt's arm. She wasn't stupid. She was already piecing it together. I leaned back, tilting my head, letting my gaze linger on him, not in anger, not in heartbreak, but in something much worse. Amusement. A slow, knowing smile curved my lips as I reached for my glass, lifting it just enough for the candlelight to catch the rim. Small world, isn't it? I mused, my voice warm, casual, as if I were running into an old friend at the grocery store. Matt swallowed hard, finally finding his voice, but it came out too tight, too forced. Gina, what are you? I held up a hand, cutting him off as I turned to the waiter standing at my side, poised with a polite, professional patience. I'll have a glass of your best champagne, please, I said, offering a smile. It's a special occasion. The waiter nodded and disappeared, and when I turned back, Matt was still staring at me, his entire world unraveling in real time. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, but I didn't rush to fill it. No, I let Matt stew in it, let him struggle to find the right words, the right reaction. The way his jaw clenched, the way his hands twitched like he wasn't sure whether to grab his drink or run, it was almost poetic. Emily, though, she wasn't nearly as composed. I could feel her eyes on me, sharp and searching. Her fingers curled around the edge of the table, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried that mix of curiosity and unease. Matt, she said slowly. Who is she? I didn't move, didn't blink, just watched him, waiting, because this was the moment of truth. Would he lie? Would he try to spin some desperate, ridiculous excuse? Or would he sit there, drowning in his own stupidity, knowing there was nothing he could say that wouldn't make this worse? His throat bobbed as he swallowed, his mind clearly spinning, but I wasn't feeling generous enough to let him dig himself a deeper hole. So, I turned to Emily, offering the same pleasant, almost sympathetic smile I had given the waiter. Oh, I'm sorry, I said, feigning innocence. I thought Matt had already told you. I let the words settle, let her anticipation build before delivering the final blow. I'm his wife. The color drained from Emily's face so fast I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Matt shifted, panic flickering in his eyes, but it was too late for him to stop what was already in motion. He had brought her here, parading her around like a prize, thinking he could get away with it. And now? Now the walls were closing in. I lifted my glass as the waiter returned with my champagne, took a slow, deliberate sip, and let my gaze settle back on Matt. "Go on," I said smoothly, setting my glass down with a quiet clink. "You were saying?" Matt looked like a man dangling off the edge of a cliff, scrambling for a grip that wasn't there. His mouth opened and closed, a flicker of words forming and dying before they ever made it out. I had never seen him speechless before. A man who always had an answer, a defense, an excuse, reduced to nothing but a stuttering mess. Emily, on the other hand, had recovered just enough to shoot daggers at him. Her face, once painted with confusion, was now twisting into something sharper, colder. She shifted slightly in her chair, pulling her hand away from his arm, as if touching him was suddenly repulsive. "You're married?" she asked, her voice low, almost eerily calm. I didn't interrupt. This wasn't my moment. This was his. This was the moment where every lie, every deception came back to strangle him. I just leaned back in my chair, watching, enjoying the way Matt struggled to assemble something, anything, that could undo what had already been set in motion. It's not what it looks like," he finally managed, voice thick with desperation. I exhaled a quiet laugh, shaking my head slightly. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, my tone dripping with mock sympathy. "That's exactly what every guilty man says when he's caught with his pants down." Emily stiffened and Matt paled even more. I just lifted my glass again, watching him unravel sip by sip. Emily pushed her chair back slightly, just enough to put space between them. Her eyes darted over his face, searching for something, an explanation, an excuse, anything that might make this less humiliating. But Matt had nothing, just the weight of his own arrogance crashing down around him. "How long?" she asked, her voice tight, controlled, like she was holding something back, rage maybe, or disgust. Matt turned to me, as if I'd somehow bail him out. The irony almost made me laugh. Instead, I tilted my head, letting him twist in the wind a little longer. When he didn't answer, I leaned forward slightly, resting my chin on my hand, and smiled at Emily like we were old friends sharing an inside joke. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, my tone light, almost playful. "That depends. Do you mean how long we've been married, or how long he's been lying to you?" Emily's face darkened. "Both." I took a slow sip of my champagne, savoring the burn of victory. Then, with the same casual ease I'd had all night, I set my glass down and answered, 10 years, and as for the lying, well, I turned to Matt, letting the silence stretch between us like a blade. "I suppose that depends on when he started telling you he loved you." The air seemed to shift, thick with the weight of it all. Emily recoiled like she'd been slapped, her entire body going rigid. I could see the moment realization set in, the way her shoulders squared, the way her lips pressed into a thin, furious line. Matt tried to reach for her hand. "Emily, She yanked it away before he could touch her. "Don't," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I smiled, watching the performance unfold. Matt, desperate. Emily, betrayed. And me? I was exactly where I wanted to be, watching it all crumble from the best seat in the house. Matt exhaled sharply, his face contorting with frustration. For a moment, I could see the wheels turning, the desperate search for some way to take back control. He had always been good at spinning a story, twisting words to his advantage. But not tonight. Tonight, his usual tactics were useless. "Gina," he started, voice lower, as if that would somehow make me more pliable. "Can we talk? Alone?" I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head. "Talk? Oh, sweetheart, you had plenty of chances to talk." I gestured vaguely between him and Emily, the wreckage of his lies sprawled across the table. "Now I think I'd rather just enjoy the show." Emily was already gathering her things, the reality of the situation settling in. She wasn't just the other woman, she was the fool. And that realization was hitting her hard. She stood up abruptly, chair scraping against the polished floor, her fury radiating off her in waves. "You told me you were divorced," she hissed, her voice low but cutting. Matt ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. "I was going to tell you. I just needed—" Emily held up a hand, silencing him. "Don't," she snapped. "I don't need to hear whatever pathetic excuse you're about to come up with." Her eyes flicked to me then, and for a split second, something passed between us. Not friendship, not sympathy, but understanding. I raised my glass in a small toast. "Men like him always think they're smarter than they are," I said lightly. "Consider this a lesson learned." Her lips pressed together in something that almost resembled a smirk. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away, her exit swift and deliberate. Matt sagged in his chair, his hand dragging down his face as he watched her go. And me? I just leaned back, utterly, deliciously satisfied. Matt looked like a man drowning, and for once there was no one left to save him. His mistress had stormed out, leaving nothing behind but the scent of expensive perfume and the sting of betrayal. He turned back to me, jaw clenched, eyes pleading, but I just took another sip of my champagne, savoring the way the bubbles fizzed against my tongue. "Gina, please," he murmured, voice raw, desperate. "Can we just step outside? Talk for a second?" I tilted my head, pretending to consider it, then smiled. "No." His nostrils flared. "You don't have to do this here." "Oh, but I do," I said, placing my glass down with a soft clink. "You see, Matt, I spent years playing the role of the perfect wife, the patient, understanding, forgiving wife." I leaned forward slightly, letting my voice drop just enough to make him squirm. "But you don't get to humiliate me and walk away with your dignity intact. Not tonight." I reached into my clutch and pulled out a sleek black card, the one I'd used to book my table. With deliberate slowness, I slid it across the linen tablecloth toward him. His brows furrowed. "What is this?" I smiled, sickly sweet. "Your problem now. That's the card you were going to use to pay for this lovely dinner, right?" I let the question hang, watching the confusion shift into something much darker. "Well, funny thing, I canceled it this morning." The blood drained from his face. I leaned back, enjoying the sheer panic blooming in his expression. "Looks like this meal's on you, darling. Or, maybe you can ask Emily to come back and cover it." His hands fumbled toward his wallet, flipping it open like a man desperately searching for a way out of a burning building. But I already knew what he'd find. Nothing, because I had taken care of that too. Matt's fingers fumbled through his wallet, flipping through the empty slots where his credit cards used to be. I could almost hear the gears in his head screeching to a halt, the realization sinking in like dead weight. His lips parted, his breath shallow as he tried to process the impossible. They're gone," he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible over the murmur of the restaurant. I sighed, feigning disappointment. "Oh, right. I almost forgot. I had all of your cards canceled this morning." I tapped a manicured finger against my chin, as if I were just remembering some minor errand I'd checked off my list. "Bank account's frozen too. It's amazing what you can do when you're listed as the primary holder on everything, isn't it?" His eyes snapped up to mine, a mixture of disbelief and sheer panic clouding his face. "Gina," he started, his voice low, barely contained. "This isn't funny." I arched a brow. "Oh, I'm not laughing." And I wasn't. I had smiled, I had toyed with him, but now, I wanted him to feel it, the weight of his choices pressing down on him like an iron vice. The way my choices had weighed on me every time I stayed up waiting, every time I swallowed my suspicions, every time I convinced myself that love was enough to justify his lies. He ran a shaking hand down his face, exhaling harshly. The waiter appeared at the worst possible moment, placing the leather check holder on the table with a practiced politeness. "Whenever you're ready, sir," he said, before disappearing into the sea of dim candlelight and whispered conversations. Matt stared at the bill like it was a death sentence. And in a way, It was. I reached into my purse, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and placed it gently on my side of the table. "For the tip," I murmured, flashing a saccharine smile. "You always were terrible at tipping, Matt." Then I stood, smoothing the fabric of my dress, feeling lighter than I had in years. I took my time. Not out of cruelty, though, let's be honest, Matt deserved every second of this, but because I wanted to savor it. The moment. The power shift. The sheer poetry of watching a man who once carried himself like a king suddenly reduced to a pathetic, stammering mess. Matt's hands gripped the check holder like he could will a solution into existence. His head snapped up, his voice urgent, hushed. "Gina, please," he rasped. "Don't do this. We can fix this. Just sit down. Let's talk." I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. Let's see. No. I could practically feel his frustration bubbling over, but he was trapped. He knew he couldn't make a scene. Not here, not now. That was the beauty of it. I hadn't stormed in, screaming accusations or throwing drinks. No. I had been calm, controlled, dignified. And that was what destroyed him the most. He clenched his jaw, eyes darting toward the exit, probably calculating how fast he could slip out before the restaurant caught on that he had no way to pay. A last-ditch effort, a pathetic one. I took a step closer, just enough for him to hear me, just enough to ensure that my final words would haunt him long after I was gone. "To new beginnings," I whispered, lifting my glass in one final, deliberate toast. Then, without another glance, I turned on my heel and walked away, straight-backed, unbothered, victorious. As I reached the door, I heard the unmistakable shuffle of the waiter returning, followed by Matt's strangled voice. Do you take Apple Pay?" I didn't laugh, not until I stepped outside into the cool night air, where the world stretched open before me, endless and free. The night air felt different, crisper, lighter, like a weight had been lifted from my chest. For years, I had carried the invisible burden of Matt's lies, his betrayals. I had convinced myself that ignoring the red flags made me stronger, that looking the other way meant I was choosing love over suspicion. But love shouldn't have to be chosen over self-respect. And tonight, I chose me. I stepped off the curb, letting the city hum around me, the sounds of distant laughter and clinking glasses blending into the quiet euphoria settling in my bones. I pulled my phone from my purse, scrolled past the dozen unread messages from Matt, and instead opened my banking app. 0 shared accounts. Every dollar I was entitled to, transferred. The divorce lawyer, already working on the paperwork. The apartment lease, in my name now. The car Matt had been so smug about driving, repossessed as of 9 a.m. this morning. I smiled, swiping out of the app. Matt had spent years building a life where he controlled the narrative. He thought he was untouchable. That I would always be there, waiting, forgiving, understanding. But tonight, the story had changed, and I was the one writing the ending. I slid into the driver's seat of my car, feeling the soft leather beneath my fingertips. It felt different now, mine in a way it hadn't been before. For so long, everything in my life had been shared, or at least I had believed it was. But marriage, as it turned out, had been nothing more than an illusion Matt carefully curated. He had built a world where he held the reins, where I existed in the background, supportive, trusting. Not anymore. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat, ignoring the vibrations of another incoming call. It wasn't worth my energy, not tonight. Instead, I took a deep breath and let the moment settle over me, the stillness, the quiet triumph. Then, as if the universe needed to reward me just a little more, my phone lit up with a new notification. Not from Matt, from my lawyer. All assets secured, divorce proceedings filed, he'll be served first thing in the morning. A slow smile stretched across my lips. I had done it. I had burned the bridge, salted the earth, and walked away without a single regret. I reached for the ignition, the engine purring to life beneath my fingertips. Then, almost as an afterthought, I picked up my phone, tapped into my call log, and with one final, satisfying motion, blocked Matt's number. No more explanations, no more excuses, no more him. And as I pulled away from the curb, leaving the wreckage of my old life behind, I felt it at last. Freedom. The city blurred past me, neon lights streaking against the windshield as I drove without a destination in mind. For the first time in years, I didn't need one. There was no Matt waiting at home, no anxious nights spent wondering if I was being paranoid, no forcing a smile through the gnawing ache of doubt. Just me, the open road, and a future that was finally mine. I turned onto a quiet stretch of road, rolling the window down just enough to let the cool night air rush in. It smelled fresh, like rain had passed through earlier, washing the city clean. Fitting. A storm had come and gone, leaving me standing on the other side, untouched. My phone buzzed again on the seat beside me. For a brief second, I considered ignoring it, but something made me glance down. Not Matt this time. Someone else. Unknown number. I heard what you did. I have to say, I'm impressed. I frowned, my grip tightening on the wheel. My heart didn't race, didn't lurch into panic, but there was a flicker of something, a whisper of intrigue. A second message popped up before I could process the first. Unknown number. Let's just say, you're not the only one who wanted to see Matt taken down. Call it admiration or opportunity. A slow chill crept down my spine. Was this a joke? A mistake? Or had I underestimated just how many skeletons Matt had in his closet? I exhaled, rolling my shoulders, pushing away the flicker of unease. Whoever it was, they weren't my problem. Not tonight. I had won my battle. And if someone else wanted to dance on the ruins of Matt's downfall, that was their business. Still, as I drove through the quiet streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that my story wasn't quite over yet. And maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning.